Joining me now is Mike Mostert, who is the guitarist for In Theory. They have a great new song out there called Heroes. Welcome to the show, Mike. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for making the time for us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, reading a little bit up on you guys, I know that you spend time between LA, New York, and Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Now, that seems like that's probably under normal circumstances. Have you kind of been hunkered down in one place the last few months, or have you still been kind of floating between the few places?
My mainly it's Muscle Shoals for the most part, and and secondary would be Ventura, California would be my secondary, but my main residence is in Muscle Shoals. And I'm sure if you know what Muscle Shoals is, the famous music city, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that for me, just personally, I was always a little bit more of a hard rock, and I don't want to say heavy metal, but more of like a hard rock guy. But I definitely know, like it makes me think of like, the Allman Brothers and kind of
oh yeah,
that sound. So that's what I always associate with Muscle Shoals, is,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and it's again like some of the newer bands have been doing stuff here as well. I mean, like Rival Sons, they just
sure.
won the Grammy. They just did their last record here, and Steven Tyler's been doing stuff down here, and so some of the hard rock guys are discovering this place.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's like obviously you'll hear about just a ton of hard rock guys that live in Nashville now too. So all of a sudden these southern rock / country cities, all of a sudden it's like, well, no, they're just great music cities. And I'm sure that there's great studios that come there, and I can hear a little bit of that reflected in the song. But talk a little bit about just all the different kinds of music that influenced you as you were, sort of developing your style and how to
Well,
play.
I'm with you. I mean, growing up, I mean, I'm a hard rock guy, and when from getting my first Kiss record and Aerosmith
Right.
Hard Rocks record, an Angel record, UFO, that was like
Sure.
my go-to triumph. I mean, those were my guys when 14 years old, 15 years old, and so that's my background. And when I finally was trying to make it in music at a young age, definitely Yngwie was a big influence way back, and then the hair started growing out, and then by the time I had what I called my official rock helmet aquanetted out. My hair was past the waist, and so that's my musical influence was that, and it was really such a very unique road to get where I am now. And so anyway, in the early 90s, I was signed to EMI Records with Tony in a band called Big Mouth. And at the time, I knew I was not going to make it in music. And so I just immersed myself in my companies, and Go-Go is one of the companies. And that was really my focus. And then every once in a while I would do a project for film or for TV, but it was not my focus. And Tony and I have probably done maybe, did I lose you? Maybe we've done about like
I could
20,
hear you the whole time. Yeah.
We've maybe done about 20 films and TV shows, anyway from HBO and Showtime to NBC and some major films and so. But it was something that I wasn't really pursuing anymore. I was just focusing on my businesses. And again, I thought it was, I'm not sure if you're a person that believes in fate, or things happen for a reason, or you make your own luck, but the last thing I was expecting was to get back into music. I feel it's like the Godfather saying, you thought you were out, but they bring you back in.
Right, of course.
And by accident, I was in New York maybe it was about 5 years ago. It was about 5 years ago. And a friend of mine was playing, and I went to see him at 3 a.m. And I really don't know. I always make a little bit of a joke. I'm not sure if it was the Jack Daniels, if it was 3 a.m, or the fact that him and I never really had a deep conversation of any sort. So a lot of it was, just buds, just, it's a lot of surface talk, nothing really deep. And I went to say, hey, great show. And he comes up to me, he goes, so still playing guitar? And I gave him the bull answer. I go, oh yeah, I'm still playing. He goes, Mike, you really have to play guitar. It's why you got in the business. It's who you are. It's a part of your soul. And I'm like, okay, like, wow. Okay. but my business had still switched on me because the products I make is for musicians. I make, I created a company called Go-Go Tuners. I make music tuners for some of the biggest bands on the planet. And so my thinking was, you know what, it'll be really good for the musicians to know that I'm just not an inventor. I'm not a tinkerer. I designed my products as a musician for a musician. So that was sort of my, okay, that's what was my thinking. And I knew I had an interview about 4 months out. And originally I was going to have an artist do it with me. And I really thought about it. And I go, you know what? I should be the guy playing guitar, not this artist. So for 4 months straight, I practiced from 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. so I could sound good for 75 seconds. And then my first coming out was to play on Fox TV in front of about 20 million people. That was my first, there you go. Mike is taking a step back into the music.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was doing with the go-go artists, I would interview them, but I would also play one song with them, or sometimes 2 songs. And it would give me 20 days or 30 days to learn their song. And again, I want to do their songs justice. And the thing is, I want to be respected as a musician. I didn't want to be like, oh, it's kind of cute to let the CEO play. I wanted to be respected as well. So I would prepare each interview, and I was doing more and more of those. And then I started getting invited through the country. Hey, come and be our guest guitar player, like all these different events. And then I started doing my own events where I was the house band. And it was just a progression. And then finally, it was exactly 2 years ago in May. I said, and it's never been done in the music retail industry. Like with all the big companies, I'm thinking like, you got Fender and Gibson, TC Electronic, like Roland, like the biggest guys on the planet. No one's ever done a roster record with their artists. So since I had so many high profile artists and I'm very close with them, I was like, I want to make an artist record. And I was thinking maybe I'll play a little guitar here, a little guitar there. And I started going down the list. Hey, you want to play? I got to the 7th or 8th person. And they're like, well, why don't we write? And then another light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, okay, well, not only am I going to write, I ended up writing, co-writing every song, sharing guitar duties on every song, and then producing the entire record. And that one was a big journey because I recorded that New York, Philly, Muscle Shoals, Nashville, Virginia, Hollywood, Ventura, Mexico, like all over. Because I set a goal, I want to get this done in 1 year. It took me 1 year and 3 days to get this done. And when we put that record out, a hard rock band, in theory, is emerged out of that. And of course, I had to bring Tony back in, for that record because, Tony and I have always been brother in arms, and not only in friendship but in music as well. So it does seem like if I'm going to come back into it, he's the most logical guy as well. So I had Tony on 3 songs on the record doing the hard rock stuff, and I put one old Big Mouth record, one Big Mouth song that we never released when we were on EMI, and then 2 In Theory songs that we wrote. And the thought process was how would Tony and I write music in 2020, 2020, like, or 2019, or the new hard rock band? And that was our first foray. It was on the Go-Go record, and from that, the record did quite well, and we got a lot of press, and a lot of people love that band. So Tony and I wanted to take it one step further to where we are now with this single that we just that you probably heard, the new single Heroes.
Yeah, Heroes. Yeah, sure.
And with the style that we're doing now, I felt like the Go-Go record was really good. It was good. It was really good. But I wanted to make somewhere not on a conceited level, but I wanted to put something where I felt it was great. Like it could be so on the level of everybody else. Not necessarily better than everybody, but what I'm saying, to be on a same level, to be on a high level of what we're doing. And so what happened, and this is where the pandemic was a silver lining. Originally, I was just going to bring Tony down to Muscle Shoals. We were going to do like old school, like Zeppelin recording, where everybody's in the same room, but you have the baffles up, but you're feeding off each other's energy, like a really old school recording. And because of the pandemic, Tony couldn't make it down. and that plan I had to throw out the window. And the blessing in disguise was I just want to become the best musician I could ever be, and writer and a producer. So every day I immerse myself, I mean, doing 10, 12 hours a day, just anything I could learn, like any style, like, oh, what is that guitar player doing here? How did they produce this? And I just started like studying, and I wrote something like 60 or 70 songs. I have a notebook of 70 songs, and I just was writing and just getting better at my craft. And when I felt I had enough ideas, I ran it by Tony. I go, and I had Tony do his thing, and then boy, did I push Tony, and I felt there's many times I make that joke that Tony was going to choke me through Zoom or through the phone, because I also wanted Tony to be great as well. And I think the fact, I mean, and I'm not exaggerating, he probably did almost 200 takes per song. And it wasn't because of performance. I wanted to capture something, in his vocal. And I studied like every little line, like, no, you got to do the vibrato like this. No, this word's not right. This one you got to, do less vibrato, keep it straight, do like every little thing. And, and I think the result speaks for itself. I mean, one of the biggest reactions, especially for the people that like Big Mouth or follow In Theory from the Go-Go record, even from DJs and producers and people that have heard that stuff, they still like, is that Tony singing? Who is that? Is that Tony? And if people who don't know him are really just blown away by the vocals. So I think the fact that he was singing 10 hours a day or recording 10 hours a day for almost 3 months straight gave him a different level of chops, So by the time the record came out, I mean, he was on it.
Yeah, and obviously we're talking about Tony Covino is who does the vocals for In Theory, and in reading the notes they kind of compare him. I think they do a good job. The press release compares him to both Chris Cornell and Lane Staley, and I mean when you think about those two singers, that's such a great range. And I mean a lot of times, look, you read press releases and you're like, yeah, I guess so, but I think that kind of nailed it. Talk about working with somebody who has that kind of range. I mean, the highs can go so high, at least judging from this song, so that must be a lot of fun to work with,
Yeah. Well, like I said, I pushed them so hard to be very cognizant of that, because, if somebody has that range, a lot of times you want to put everything on overdrive, so you have to be careful. I think if you go too far overdrive or you go too far using a certain vibrato, it puts you in a different era. It puts you in a different style, and it's not what I want to do. I think he covers so much range with his vocals that I want to really explore that with him. Like a Cornell. A Cornell could sing a ballad, a little raspy, but you know what? He can. You take the early Soundgarden, he can rip it as well.
Yeah, like I mean, just stuff like stuff that's on Bad Motorfinger. I mean, obviously all of it. Yeah, but that's a lot of that is in the much higher register. Before you get the sort of more soulful, like Black Hole Sun sort of stuff. And same thing with the Lane Staley, as high as he could go. I mean, they would go pretty deep with him. So I think it's a great comparison, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. The record you're talking about before, I guess the official title is Mike Mostert and the Go-Go Tuners Family. So that collection came out last year. And was the song Heroes on that, or there were different In Theory songs?
No, that was different In Theory. And, and actually that was going to be like a version of the hard rock band, but the bass player and the drummer, unfortunately, of that band had a business dealing, and they're suing each other on outside business dealing. And even though I love both those guys, I just felt, it was better to have to cut both, ties with both of them, which I didn't want to play favoritism to either or, because I didn't want resentment. And then also I didn't want to ruin whatever. There was a certain mojo going on with Tony and I with the new songs that we were writing. There was something special. And so for this,
you don't want to get dragged into, something where you don't want to pick either of them. You definitely can't have both of them. I think that makes sense. And you guys, it seems to have been the nucleus. You were talking about how you guys were on EMI, and the interesting thing I thought about that was EMI, for all their success, it always seemed like they were kind of all over the place. I mean, they would put out a Bowie record. They had Spice Girls, and technically Vanilla Ice was one of their artists. I know that was SBK, but that's also EMI. So do you feel like that deal that you guys had, which was what, I guess, I don't know, 25 some odd years ago, was it just not a fit where they were focused on your kind of music? I was kind of interested in how that would work out.
I really think it was just the timing. It's obviously there's the era of the we call it like the hair band. We were definitely a hair band, and it was almost as when Nirvana and ironically Soundgarden and all Alice in Chains, all those guys came out. Pretty much overnight, all the hair guys were gone. All the biggest guys. And we were lucky enough where we caught the tail end of it, but we were gone just as fast because we caught the tail end of it. So we just felt it was just really just a timing thing. Like if we were a year prior, 2 years prior, it would have been quite different, But then I look at it as this way: it's a blessing in disguise that if we would have been signed to a couple of years earlier, I think we would have been still doing that same style of music. Sure. And I'm really enjoying the growth that we're doing now, because there's so many what I call like making a great recipe. Like, you take 1 tablespoon like a little Soundgarden, you take a little Swampiness, you take a little, there's a little like Tom Morello, a little gospel bass, a little Muscle Shoals, and you take a little whatever Deep Purple, and you put it all into one style. And I think that's sort of what we're doing, because like again, Tony's vocals makes it Soundgarden-ish or a little bit Alice in Chains, but then also we're incorporating Stevie Wonder's choir, so you have this gospel choir countering Tony, and then if we add this guy, his name's Clayton Ivey, he's doing all the keys on the song that you heard. Clayton is a Muscle Shoals legend. He sold about 400 million records, and soon if he plays one note, everybody in that world, in the R&B world or Muscle Shoals world, they go Clayton. Like everybody knows, even in the country world. I mean, they know. I mean, it's within 2 notes. It's him, and so to have a legend like him on it was amazing. But so yeah, and then the bass player was sort of like a little bit of an accident. As I was trying, like I said, I had all those notes of songs, I was itching to get into the studio. And I have a certain process of writing. So what I do is once I have the ideas, I get in with the drum loop, and I just start hearing what it actually sounds like compared to what it sounds like in my home versus what it sounds like in the studio is 2 different animals. And the engineer was so pandemic freaked out, he camped out. He was not going to go to his studio. So he goes, but why don't you use my assistant? He can help out. And I just wanted to get it done. I was like, cool, sure, bring him, I'll do it with him. And I brought him down, and sure enough, I'm doing the demos, and I said, no, I really could use some bass on it. He goes, well, I play a little bass. No, he plays a whole lot of bass, and it turns out he plays a little bit like John Paul Jones meets like the bass player from Stone Temple Pilots. And this kid, I call him the kid, well, he's a kid, he's 23. Turns out he just won a Grammy for engineering the Rival Sons' last record for best rock record.
Yeah.
And he's our bass player on this thing.
Oh, that's great. And
then the drummer on the song that you heard is the drummer from Missing Persons. So he's the guy who replaced Terry Bozzio, and that's the lineup. So it's quite of a lineup.
When you were talking about the different mixture, the little bit of this, a little bit of that, I was thinking of an analogy that might on the surface seem like an insult, but I mean it as a compliment. It's like when you think about, they always talk about Kentucky Fried Chicken, how there's these top secret 11 herbs and spices. And when you think about it, it's like, that's kind of a lot, and it's like, well, you get it exactly right. So, but it's just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So you probably don't want to market yourself as the KFC of rock and roll, but there's something to be said for a mixture like that works out really well. And yeah, I mean, just from the one song, you do really hear a lot of these, these different kinds of things. So, so the song "Heroes" is out, and people can find it. It's In Theory Original, I think, is the Facebook page, and just In Theory Band is the website.
Right.
But sometimes these stories have really interesting background, and sometimes they don't. But where does the name In Theory come from?
It was actually when we were rehearsing with the guys with the Go-Go record, the original version of it, In Theory, and we were just always joking. In theory, well, this will work. In
Right.
theory, that will work. And we're like, oh, that sounds like it would be a good name for a band. In theory, so
Yeah.
that's really how that came about.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling that it was something like, well, in theory, not just in theory, in actuality, the song's great. So what's next? Now, it sounds like you have plenty of ideas. I'm going to assume there's still a number of recordings and things.
Yeah, well, we have 4 songs in the can right now.
Okay.
And then right now the plan is for the next. Over the next 30 days, we're going to release 2 more singles, and then before the end of the year will be a full record. So right now it's about 4 songs that are completed, and each one's a little bit eclectic, but they still follow that same, I wouldn't say there's a formula like KFC, but now you're going to have to do like KFC. By the way,
Yeah.
I love fried chicken, but
Yeah.
but meaning that there's. I'm combining different influences where, like, it was really important to me not to go like, oh, they're going from hard rock. Oh, now they're adding a choir. Oh, now they're going to jazz. They're going, like, it had to be like like if you're listening to like a verse, like, oh yeah, there's a little this. Like you have to really listen closely. Like, oh yeah, there's a little southern thing in it. Oh, there is a little bit of gospel. Oh, there is sound. There's. That's what I was trying to accomplish, and that's what I've been trying to do with all the songs, just melding of just enough of each genre to make it really unique. And that's the response we're getting. It's kind of, even though the influences, it's a fresh style.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know. I think it makes for an interesting sound when you have those different influences. I mean, I think you're talking sort of about the foundation of the hard rock. With Kiss, Aerosmith, UFO, all those other bands you mentioned. I mean that and then building on that for 4 decades or whatever. I think that it definitely lends itself. Sort of. Talking about some of that, I always wonder in terms of live performing, whether it was your first concert or one of the earliest concerts, was there a point where you saw someone in particular and you were like, wow, I really feel like this is when I want to take up music? Or was it not even seeing somebody live? Was it just sitting in your room listening to some of those records? Or what makes you decide that that's for that point in your life the path that you wanted to go on?
Well, I think I started really young. At 5 years old, I started playing guitar. But what really, like, souped up the engine, so to speak, was when I saw Try and Fly. My brother took me to a concert.
Wow.
I was 14 years old. I got to see him in Hempstead, New York. And I got first row, and then Rick Emmett gave me his guitar pick. I was 14 years old.
Wow.
And you can imagine as a 14-year-old, I'm like, oh my God, Rick Emmett's guitar pick. And, and of course, Rick Emmett's just a monster guitar player. And that was it for me. I was like, yeah, this, I would love to do this, and then I worked pretty hard at it, but yeah, that was it. And I think I was also fortunate enough that, my brother was 3 years older than me. And, when you're 14, they're 17, or if you're 11 and they're 14, they're a big influence on you. So he exposed me to, Kiss and Aerosmith and Rush and all these bands, early on, and, you want to emulate your brother. So I got to hear like all this stuff, and he was a bass player, and they would let me sit in with his, they would let me sit in with his band, as a teenager. And I'm sure like I messed up every single song, but they were always, but I was the younger brother. He let me like, all right,
Yeah.
we'll let you play, Slow Ride, or we'll let you play one Black Sabbath song. But they always, I would sit in and watch them rehearse, but they would always let me play one song with them. And, and it was cool. It was really nice of them to do that.
Yeah, the that impact is definitely something I can relate to. My brother's 5 years older than me, but he had just sort of when I was growing up was more like the early '80s. So he had Kiss, Lick It Up, and Animalize. So like those were like the first like
Right.
records in my house. But then he also had like Metallica, Masters of Puppets. And I think when I was a kid, I'm like I don't understand how you can listen to this. And I'm a little bit older, I get it. Maybe I wasn't angry enough to want something that loud, but
Right.
I mean, the songs on those Kiss records, those were the first Kiss songs that I actually ever knew, which is kind of funny to think about, now. But my brother had, and look, at my dad had like an old record collection. He had like all the Beatles and Stones records from the '70s. It's funny, my dad got married in 1974, and I was born 1976, so his record collection goes right up until about 1973, and then he didn't have any new records, but he had all the
Right.
old ones. So it was like I'm like, oh, I think I like the Doors. Well, my dad had all six Doors records, so it
Right. That's
was
cool.
it was kind of like a really cool thing to have that, upstairs in my dad's room, and then my brother had some like hard rock and heavy metal records. So yeah, just sort of what you have in the house, and you're talking about getting the pick. The first concert I ever saw was Alice Cooper at the Ritz in New York in 1990, and I'm remembering, which I hadn't thought about in years, that he does this thing where he takes a sword and he puts all this fake money on it that has his face on it, and then he like dangles it out and tries to get people to grab for it. And I remember I have one of those dollar bills with his face on it, so I didn't get a pick, but I have a dollar bill with Alice Cooper's
But,
face.
well, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but and that is definitely, when you can see anything that's theatrical, like the second concert I saw was Kiss, also in 1990. So, when you kind of see somebody who puts in, look, I've seen bands where the guys just kind of wander around the stage and the music still sounds great and that's fun. But as a kid, seeing people that are that exciting, it helps make you more excited for the music, Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so, so what is the idea for doing live shows? Are you going to put your face on money and dangle it out over the crowd,
Well,
or
well, 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 now I'm thinking about it. Or I'm going to bring buckets of KFC is what I'm doing.
well, look, I tell you, you can do the partnership, the KFC of rock and roll. But obviously, I know that there are shows. I mean, you're in Alabama, and I think that's a place that there are occasionally shows. I've heard of shows in Missouri and Colorado. Is it something you're thinking about, or are you more looking towards 2021 to try and figure out, doing any live
I
performing?
think what I'd like to do, because yeah, and you're right, they are doing shows in Muscle Shoals. Even the biggest clubs are open.
Yeah,
Um, I really don't know how well they're adhering to social distancing.
sure.
I'll leave it at that. They're in their own little world. But also, like I said, when I go back to Cali, and I just came back from Cali, and there it's a little bit different. They're doing shows, but maybe they're doing 100 seaters or 200 seater, if you want to call it seaters. But since there's no inside dining, and usually they would have like a band inside. They're doing
Yeah.
bands outside, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of shows, and
Yeah,
like
I
there's
live in Burbank, and you mentioned Ventura. I think the day after it, I regretted not going, but I saw that Fishbone was doing like a drive-in show, I think up in Ventura, and I was
yeah,
like, oh, I don't know if I want to see a band from my car. But then it dawned on me, I'm like, wait, I'm not going to see a band at all if I don't go in my car, And I've like gone out to the drive-in movies a couple of times because movie
right.
theaters still aren't open here. And I don't know. I mean, it's definitely different, but it could be fun, So I think that if done right, it can certainly be a fun time, to
Yeah,
see, as long
I
as you
think
can see the band, I think.
yeah, I think if they incorporate, I mean, honestly, I think if somebody was a marketing type of guy, or obviously there's the music culture, but if someone takes the football tailgating culture,
Yeah.
right, you got your pickup trucks, you got the band playing, you bring out the cooler, you bring out your grill, you're watching the band, everyone's sitting in their cars, sitting in the truck. I think it would be like such a slam dunk. It'd be such a fun way to see a show. And I remember I did that with a guy from Slayer, Gary Holt. I was
Mhm.
doing a clinic with Gary Holt, maybe it was 5, 6 years ago in Camarillo. And we did it in an industrial park. It would almost be very fitting to these times. Maybe we were just ahead of our time. and we did a clinic with
Yeah.
him, and basically, all as you know, it's in Ventura County and in Oxnard, it is that culture with the lowriders and the pickup trucks, as you know. And if you add that with the football tailgating and what's going on with the pandemic, but what all of these people did is they all parked their cars, reverse. They had their pickup, same thing. They were taking out the grills, they were taking out the beers, and we all had, we had like several hundred people who were all watching Gary Holt do his clinic. And, so that's why I think about that idea. And that was just an off the cuff idea. We just thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do. And Gary just loved it. He was going to the audience, taking the beers, just and then play some music, and I grabbed like a burger, and then go back to doing it. It was great. And I think and in Ventura they've been doing, like you said, they're doing a lot of that in Ventura. Like the woman that sang a lot of the backup on the In Theory is Lanisha. She's with Stevie Wonder's band and Jennifer Lopez. She's been doing, I think, almost every other weekend. She's been doing the driving gigs, and she's been doing the driving gigs in Pasadena as well. So there is a lot of shows that are happening, but I do think if we do the first one, I'd like to do it in Muscle Shoals, even though I technically do have one foot in Ventura. I mean, I still have a place near Main Street, in Ventura, but my main residence is here in Muscle. I'm like right, I'm dead center of Muscle Shoals. And this really quick one, what happened or what's going on in Muscle Shoals is, like I was going to say, like in the 70s, 80s, even up to the 90s, if you went to Manhattan or LA or any big city, you had all the major studios, right? A lot of major studios. And now that technology has gotten so well, you can record an album really from your house.
Sure.
But what they've done in Muscle Shoals is they're rebuilding a lot of the original studios. So Fame, they didn't touch. They left it how it is. So when you walk in there, it's still the same room where, Etta James and Percy Sledge and Allmans and all those guys, did their records. They redid Muscle Shoals Sound Studio. They when we did a lot of the record East Avalon, someone came in from out of town, bought East Avalon, bought another studio called Widget. They were around in the early 70s. Cypress Moon, which was the original Muscle Shoals sound, they're up and running. You also got Wishbone, which is owned by, I think, Billy Lawson, who's another Muscle Shoals legend and a country legend guy. His studio is up and going. This other guy is called Ivy Mansion. His studio is going. The guys from Cake, he just built a studio. So in the 8 or 9 mile radius, you have eight to 10 major studios all running. So it's taking it back to like old school.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of cool to see, to be a part of.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, I mean, it was the document of a record that they did, but Dave Grohl did that documentary for HBO where they did that Foo Fighters record. Yeah, and they went to all the different studios, well, not all, but they went to a bunch of different famous studios throughout the country, and you just, could see being in a studio that has that sort of stuff, you're going to get a specific sound. And I always thought it was kind of it was kind of a cool idea to, revisit some of those old studios. And yeah, I mean, they're all there. And I think that people can appreciate that, like, look, yeah, this kind of music sounds good there. That doesn't mean it's the only kind. So, let's do that. And I think that that's well evidenced from sort of the people you're talking about. So I think it'll be great to kind of get a chance to go out there and actually show off some of the songs. And I like the idea of putting out, a few songs at a time seems to be what people like to do. But a lot of people, I think, have been afraid to put out an album at any point in 2020. And I think that when albums have come out, it's like, oh, thank God there's something new to listen to, So I think it'll be good to give people something, because I also understand the other side of it. Bands want to promote albums when they can go out and tour for them and all that, and they can't do that until next year at the earliest. Right. But I think as just a fan, I like getting the new music now because I'm home and there's only so much Netflix you can watch, so it's great be able to put on the headphone. Well, Mike, I appreciate you chatting with me, and also really looking forward to hearing more from the band, and hopefully the album at the end of the year, and maybe you'll be at the fairgrounds in Ventura sometime next year or somewhere like that. And
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll be back in Cali soon anyway, in about 10 days or so after the end
yeah,
of the month. I'm recording some stuff at the end of the month. I'm finishing up, I think 2 more In Theory songs, but I'm also doing a record with the singer from Stevie Wonder as well.
oh great,
So, which is turning out to be weird. It's like if Phil Collins meets Alanis Morissette with a touch of, I don't know, like a little jazzy.
wow, yeah,
And it wasn't the intention, but we're doing this song, and I think it's maybe my state of mind, that I'm in, and there's a little bit of, you know, there's a lot of songs I did with her early on, like with the Go-Go stuff and other stuff. Where it was a lot about like being in love and all that, and this other stuff right now is a bit more like, like early a lot. There's an anger to it. There's an
yeah,
angst to it, and
yeah,
so. It's a lot of fun, but it wasn't music that we were expecting to do. Like I said, we were trying to do some blues jazz stuff, and for some reason the ideas were not flowing the way they normally do. And so I just detuned the guitar very much like Alice in Chains would do. I had an acoustic, we put a mic up, and we wrote the song, and it came out like acoustically. When it's just acoustic, it sounds like the recording from Alice in Chains Unplugged, but with a female singer that has a ridiculous range.
yeah.
But when we actually started putting vocals on it, like real vocals and her harmonies, you got a little bit of, like you said, like, Phil Collins meets Alanis Morissette with the gospel with Tony Braxton, and like,
Wow, yeah,
and because she's got that, or Whitney Houston, like she's got that range, that like a Tony range.
yeah.
So you go a little slow to that high, but the material is quite different.
Well, I know not everybody loves the unplugged style of music, but I always thought that a lot of those came out as actual albums, those MTV Unplugged shows, and just hearing the songs arranged that way, like Nirvana is a good example. But there's, look, because it's what I grew up liking. I love the Kiss Unplugged record because those
Oh yeah.
songs arranged like that and hearing them like that, you're like, oh, you don't realize how great these songs are until you hear them kind of deconstructed like that, and different kind of music. But that version of LL Cool J doing Mama Said Knock You Out on MTV Unplugged was just like, in that moment in time, you're just like, oh wait, this isn't, these guys are all musicians. It's not like all out of a computer, and it was kind of a nice thing to see. And especially when you listen to those in headphones, you're hearing things, you're like, well, the record doesn't sound like that, So
Yeah.
I always appreciate sort of that kind of
Yeah,
comparison.
and that's so, it's funny that you said that, because that's the philosophy I have with Tony, and every music that we're doing. I go, if it doesn't sound good being played on an acoustic, then the song is not going to be good. I said, I don't care if you put all the heavy guitars, the biggest drums, all the harmonies. If it doesn't sound good deconstructed, it will never be a good song. So all these songs that you're hearing are actually written on a 6-string or a 12-string. And if
Okay.
I know if it sounds good on that, then I take it to the next level and I start building different parts on it. And because I really believe that. Like,
Yeah.
it's sort of that saying, like, you can't put perfume on a pig. I mean, if it's not good to begin with, or if the foundation is weak, I don't care what you put on it, it's still going to be weak. Where if it's obviously a strong foundation, all the other stuff is just icing in it, and it really, you can make a great song greater. And that's the philosophy we had on it, And like I said, that's one studio in Muscle Shoals. He's got that magic 12-string guitar, and I'm gonna like, I don't know, I have to steal it from him, or I have to buy it from him. But that guitar has got Matt. He has an old Martin 12-string,
Right.
and 2 of the songs were written. That Hero song was written on that by accident. I mean, I was working on a ballad, which is the 3rd single, and the engineer, sometimes they're doing their thing in the control room, and whatever they're doing, sometimes it takes 10-15 minutes for them to do something. And I'm in the live room, and I start doing that riff to Heroes, the opening riff. I just start playing it. I'm like, this is a cool riff, and right on the spot, I wrote that entire song if it's not exactly like 15 minutes, I wrote that song.
Wow.
Where all the other songs took me, 4 months, 5 months. That one is like one of the accident songs. I mean, it literally took me about 15 minutes. And, I went from idea to idea to idea, and then we put everything down, the electrics and as far as the initial idea, but then when we obviously had to put down the real guitars and all that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
it's interesting when you hear so often, bands will talk about, all the time they spend on an album, but like either the hit single or the main, the best known song is usually the one. It's like, oh yeah, we wrote that in half an hour. That's like a lot of times like that's the one, and sometimes it's
right, like the Def Leppard story, right? With the Pour Some Sugar on Me
right. That's exactly one of the ones I was thinking of. Yeah, that it's like you think about how much time, and let's be honest, the millions of dollars they spent doing that Hysteria record, but what is their signature song as the whole band, their best known Def Leppard song being Pour Some Sugar on Me. And it's so simple, but that's why it's so great. I mean, a song like, I Want You to Want Me by Cheap Trick is again, a really simple song, but it like lives in your head, and I'm thinking of that song because, you're kind of talking about reverse engineering sometimes to acoustic, but then that's an example where it's like you never hear the studio version of I Want You to Want Me. You always hear the live at Budokan version. You usually hear Rock and Roll All Night from Kiss Alive, not from Dress to Kill. And I think that those unplugged sessions would, Nirvana took some of their stuff from their first record, Bleach, and that stuff was all really loud, a lot of feedback, and it sounded great. But like as acoustic, you're like, no, these are actually like beautiful songs. Like the song About a Girl that I think people wouldn't have known if they didn't do it there. Right. And it might be sacrilege, but I'm going to say that their version of The Man Who Sold the World, I personally prefer to the David Bowie one.
It's funny. I was just thinking about the same song as you were talking about that. Yeah, that version they do is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm about to spend the rest of the afternoon listening to all the MTV Unplugged, thinking about
in my car, I've been listening to the Allison, like I said, this by accident when I recorded with the Stevie Wonder folks in Cali 2 weeks ago. Like, I mean, the guitar sounds like it has that same guitar sound, and I'm using this drum loop. I'm listening to it, I'm like, it sounds just like it. And when she had no words, she's just like, I call it mush mouth. She's like doing, I go, wow, if you put a harmony on that, it would sound like Alice in Chains song. And the funny thing is she has no idea who they are. Never heard one song. And then I played it for her and she was like, oh my God, that sounds just like Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
Which is really funny. But yeah, the tone, and we weren't going for that. It was, again, one of those happy accidents. It was out of frustration. We were in the control room trying to write. We couldn't. We just put a microphone right in the middle of the room. And she was sitting down in a chair. I sat on the chair on the opposite side of the mic. We let the mic just roll. And we were just going back and forth. And we found some magic on it. There's like, thank God I didn't realize that the engineer kept the entire session rolling. Oh yeah. And then he sent me the MP3 of the entire recording. I'm like, wow, there is a lot of cool stuff, but in the moment it didn't feel like it. Yeah, just imagine hearing you say that. Obviously now you can just record the whole session. It's so easy because it's you do it all digitally. Just think about if there weren't the concerns for buying more tape. Like, what if they recorded every minute the Stones were in the studio for Exile on Main Street, like all the stuff that was not put down while they were figuring it out. You know what I mean? Right. Like stuff like that. All the Beatles sessions that weren't filmed for like Let It Be or whatever, so that's great to have that as an option in this day and age. Mike, I could talk to you about music all day, and I feel like once the album comes out, we're going to have to talk again. I appreciate your time and absolutely. I love talking music with you. It's great. Yeah, I literally could do this another 4 hours. InTheoryBand.com. That's where you're just going to find everything. And then I know on Facebook, it's In Theory Original. So they can find everything there. Mike Mostert, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a great day. You too.